For 6 months, my life had been singular in its focus. Sterling Finch. The name was a watermark on my brain. The first thing I thought of when I woke up and the last problem I solved before I fell asleep. They were the Moby Dick of corporate. Accounts a massive multinational conglomerate, known for being brilliant, innovative, and notoriously difficult to land. They chewed through account managers and burned through proposals. They didn't just want a vendor, a visionary who could anticipate their needs before they even knew they had them. And for 183 days, I had been that person. My name is Amelia Hayes, and I'm a senior account strategist. It's a vague title that means I do the real work. While others in my office were schmoozing on the golf course or crafting clever emails, I was the one buried in data. Building the strategic frameworks that actually made our clients money. I'm not a salesperson in the traditional sense. I'm a builder. I build relationships. I build strategies. And I build trust. And with Sterling Finch, I had built a masterpiece. It started with a cold call that went nowhere. But instead of giving up, I spent a month reading every article, every quarterly report, every interview ever given by their CEO, the formidable Eleanor Alistair. I found a problem in their supply chain logistics. They hadn't publicly identified yet. I drafted a 10-page white paper proposing a solution and sent it to her directly, with a subject line that simply said, "A solution for Q3." She agreed to a 15-minute video call. That call turned into an hour. That hour turned into weekly strategy sessions. I was the only one on the calls. I did the research, one built the decks. I answered her razor-sharp questions at 2 a.m. My boss, David, was trelid. Of course. "Keep doing what you're doing, Amy," he'd say. "This is huge for us." The only other person who showed any interest was my coworker, Ben Carter. Ben was my corporate foil, where I was quiet and data-driven. Ben was loud and charismatic. He had a dazzling smile, a fiam hensec, and a black belt in office politics. He never landed a client through strategy. He landed them through sheer force of personality. He treated my work on Sterling Finch with a kind of amused curiosity. "How's the whale hunting going, Amy?" he'd ask, leaning against my cubicle wall. "Don't forget to share the credit when you land her." He always said it with a laugh, as if it were a joke. The day we finally got the verbal confirmation, the day Ms. Alistair said, "Send the final contract, Amelia. Let's make this official." I felt a profound, quiet joy. I had done it. On my own terms. Through sheer competence and relentless effort. The final signing meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. It was meant to be a formality, a celebration. David, my boss, would be there, and Miss Alistair would be flying in. I spent the entire weekend polishing the final presentation, a summary of the 6-month journey and the roadmap for our future partnership. On Tuesday morning, David called me into his office. Ben Carter was sitting there, smiling his easy, confident smile. "Great news," David said. Beaming ... Ben has cleared his schedule. He's going to co-present with you today. We want to show Sterling Finch the full strength of our team. I stared at him. "What? Why? I have it handled." "It's a huge deal, Amy," David said, his tone shifting from celebratory to placating. "It looks better if it's a team win. Ben is great with the big picture stuff. You've done the heavy lifting. Now let him help you run it across the finish line. Just walk him through the deck." A cold knot formed in my stomach. I knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't about the strength of our team. This was about Ben wanting his name on the biggest deal of the decade. And David, who valued optics above all else, was letting him. I had no choice. In a haze of disbelief, I spent the next hour walking, Ben through my 6 months of work. He nodded along, asking superficial questions. his eyes already gleaming with a victory he hadn't earned. In the boardroom, he took the lead. He stood at the head of the table, using my slides, telling my stories, presenting my data with a confident flourish that made it seem like it was all his. He'd use phrases like, "what our team discovered," and "the strategy we developed." I sat to his right, a silent, supporting character in the story of my own success. David beamed. Miss Alistair watched, her expression unreadable. When the contract was signed, the champagne was poured. David clapped Ben on the back. "Incredible work, son. You really knocked it out of the park." Ben raised his glass. "To a team effort," he said, and he had the audacity to wink at me. I felt a phantom pain, sep and dep, as if a knife had been slid between my ribs. He hadn't just stolen my work, he had stolen my joy. And the worst part, he had done it right in front of me, and everyone had let him. The celebration in the office felt like a funeral. My funeral. People I barely knew were coming up to congratulate Ben, slapping him on the back, shaking his hand. He was holding court by the water cooler, retelling the story of how we landed. Sterling Finch, his voice booming with a false modesty that made my stomach turn. I could hear him from my desk. Oh, it was a real team effort. Amy was fantastic. With the details, a real rock star with the spreadsheets. He made me sound like his personal research assistant. I retreated into the sterile quiet of my cubicle, the congratulatory emails pinging in my inbox feeling like tiny, mocking insults. "Great work. Team. Huge win for Ben and Amy." They didn't know. They just saw the win. They didn't see the theft. David walked by my desk, his face flushed with champagne and success. "You okay, Amy?" he asked, his voice a little too loud. "You're being awfully quiet. You should be proud. This is a huge win for you." "Too. For me?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "It didn't seem that way in the meeting. You let him take all the credit." David's smile tightened. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Now, let's not be like that. Ben has a certain presence. He's good in the room. You're good behind the scenes. It's a perfect partnership. The client is happy. The deal is signed. That's all that matters. Don't be a sore winner. Be a team player. Be a team player." The corporate mantra for shut up and take it. It was the phrase they used to silence dissent, to make you feel petty for wanting what you had rightfully earned. I looked at my boss, a man I had respected, and all I saw was a coward. Someone who would rather placate a charismatic bully than stand up for his competent, loyal employee. That night, I went home to my empty apartment and did something I hadn't done in years. I updated my resume. I scrolled through job listings, the blue light of the screen illuminating my face in the dark room. The anger had subsided into a cold, heavy resignation. I couldn't work here anymore. I couldn't work for a boss who wouldn't protect me, and alongside a co-worker who would brazenly steal from me. The trust was gone. The foundation had crumbled. A week later, the official company-wide announcement went out, announcing a new director of strategic accounts, Ben Carter. I read the email in stunned silence. Not only had he stolen my deal, he had used it to get the promotion I had been working towards for the last 2 years. The announcement went on to detail his new role. Ben will be leading our new flagship account, Sterling Finch, ensuring a seamless transition and a successful long-term partnership. He will be supported by senior account strategist, Amelia Hayes, whose diligent work was instrumental in the initial phases. They had relegated my 6 months of tireless, solitary work to a footnote. I was no longer the architect of the deal. I was support staff, a glorified administrative assistant on my own project. The humiliation was absolute. It was a public execution of my career at this company. Ben stopped by my desk later that day, leaning against the wall with that same infuriatingly casual posture. "Hey, partner," he said with a grin. "Did you see the news? Looks like you and I are going to be working together a lot more closely. Big things ahead for us." I didn't look up from my screen. "Don't call me partner," I said, my voice a shard of ice. "You and I are not partners. You're a thief, and I'm the one you stole from." His smile vanished. His eyes went cold. "You better watch yourself, Amy," he hissed, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I'm a director now, and you're on my team. That diligence you're so good at. You work for me now, so you can either be a team player, like David said, or you can make things very, very difficult for yourself. / your choice." He pushed himself off the wall and walked away, leaving me shaking with a rage so profound it felt like it might consume me whole. I was trapped, and the man who had stolen my success now held my career in his hands. The official kickoff. Meeting with Sterling Finch was scheduled for 2 weeks after the signing. 2 weeks of a slow, simmering hell. Ben, in his new role as director, was insufferable. He scheduled endless, pointless meetings where he would strategize by restating ideas I had come up with months ago. He would ask me to pull the data on things I had already analyzed and presented. He was performing the role of a leader, a pantomime of competence, and making my life a living nightmare in the process. I played my part. I was quiet, efficient, and professional. I gave him the data he asked for. I answered his questions. I was the perfect support staff. But inside I was documenting everything. Every email, every meeting request, every instance of him taking credit for my work. I was building a case, though I didn't know who I would ever present it to. It was a futile gesture, perhaps, but it was the only thing that kept me sane. I told myself I would endure it until the initial transition was complete. Then I would quit. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of forcing me out. I would leave on my own terms. The day of the kickoff meeting arrived. It was to be a full-day affair in our largest boardroom. Ben was in his element. He was dressed in a tailored suit that cost more than my rent, his hair perfectly coiffed, his smile dazzling. He had even brought in pastries from a fancy bakery. "All right, team," he said, clapping his hands together. As I walked into the room, "Let's do this. Amy, can you make sure the presentation is loaded up and ready to go?" He spoke to me as if I were his secretary. I said nothing, just plugging in the laptop and pulling up the deck. The same deck I had created, now with his name and new title on the opening slide. Ms. Alistair and her team from Sterling Finch arrived precisely on time. She was as I remembered her, sharp, impeccably dressed, with an air of no-nonsense authority that filled the room. She greeted David, our boss, with a polite nod, and then her eyes found me. She gave me a small, almost imperceptible smile, a flicker of warmth in the cold room. Ben immediately stepped forward, his hand outstretched. "Ms. Alistair, great to see you again." "Ben Carter. On behalf of our entire team, welcome. We are so thrilled to get started." She shook his hand briefly, her gaze cool. "Mr. Carter." We all took our seats. Ben, of course, took the seat at the head of the table. David sat beside him, beaming like a proud father. I sat further down, next to one of the junior analysts, my laptop open, ready to be the silent operator of the presentation. Ben cleared his throat and began. "So, to kick things off, I want to reiterate our vision for this partnership," he said, his voice smooth and confident. Strategy I plan to implement is focused on 3 key pillars. He was 2 sentences into his grand vision when Ms. Alistair held up a single, elegant hand. The gesture was quiet, but it had the force of a thunderclap. Then stopped mid-sentence, his mouth slightly agape. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter," she sighed, her voice calm but with an unmistakable edge of steel. "There seems to be a misunderstanding." She turned her head and looked directly at me, down the long, polished table. Her gaze cut through the corporate posturing, the hierarchy, the bullshit. "My deal is with Miss Hayes," she said, her voice clear and ringing in the sudden, dead silence of the room. "I spent 6 months vetting her. I analyzed her strategies. I stress-tested her proposals. My trust is in her. The entire foundation of this partnership rests on my confidence in her abilities." She turned her gaze back to a stunned Ben and a horrified David. "So, with all due respect to you gentlemen, I don't know what vision you plan to implement. The only vision I'm interested in is the one Miss Hayes and I have been developing for the last 6 months. So, if she is not the one leading this account, if she is not my primary and sole point of contact, then there is no account. There is no partnership. Am I making myself clear?" The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Ben's face, which had been a mask of smug confidence, had crumbled. He was pale, his mouth working silently. David looked like he had been slapped. He stared at Miss Alistair, then at me, then back again. A look of pure, unadulterated panic on his face. And me? I just sat there, my hands frozen on my laptop. I felt a dizzying, terrifying surge of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. It was like being struck by lightning. And in that moment, in the wreckage of Ben's career and David's confidence, I knew with absolute certainty that everything had just changed. The rest of the meeting was a blur. Miss Alistair, having detonated the bomb, simply turned back to me as if nothing had happened. "Amelia," she said, her tone softening slightly, "perhaps you could walk us through the Q1 implementation timeline you drafted." I blinked, my mind still reeling. I looked at David, who gave me a frantic, desperate little nod. I looked at Ben, who was staring at his hands, his face a mottled, angry red. I stood up, moved to the head of the table, and delivered the presentation I had been preparing to watch him give. My voice, shaky at first, grew stronger with each slide. I was in my element now, talking about the work, the data, the strategy, the part that was undeniably mine. When the meeting concluded, Miss Alistair and her team left with polite goodbyes. The moment the door closed behind them, the fragile peace shattered. What the hell was that? David hissed, his face pale with fury and panic. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Ben. How was I supposed to know she was going to do that? Ben shot back, his voice defensive. She was perfectly fine with me in the signing meeting. She wasn't fine with you. David snapped. She was being polite. Now she's threatening to pull the biggest deal this company has seen in a decade because of you. Because you overplayed your hand. They continued to argue, their voices rising, completely ignoring my presence. It was as if I were a ghost in the room, a ghost who had just been handed a golden scepter. I quietly packed up my laptop and walked out of the boardroom. Let them fight. This was their mess to figure out. I went back to my cubicle, my heart still hammering in my chest. People were staring at me. The news was already spreading through the office grapevine. The whispers followed me down the hallway. I could feel the power dynamics of the entire floor shifting in real time. I was no longer Amy, the quiet one. I was Amy, the one who held the Sterling Finch deal in the palm of her hand. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a daze. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. They underestimated you. Don't let them do it again. E.A. Eleanor Alastair. She had just thrown me a lifeline and a challenge all in one. Don't let them do it again. It meant I had to do something. I couldn't just go back to my desk and hope for the best. She had given me the leverage. It was up to me to use it. The question was, how? What did I even want? Revenge. Did I want to see Ben fired? Did I want to humiliate him as he had humiliated me? The thought was tempting. A sweet, dark pull, but it felt. Smell. Vengeance wasn't a strategy. What I wanted was respect. I wanted the job I had earned. I wanted the promotion Ben had stolen. I wanted to run the account I had built. I didn't want to just be the one they couldn't fire. I wanted to be the one they couldn't afford to lose. That evening, I went home and instead of looking at job listings, I opened a new document. I started to write. I documented every single step of the Sterling Finch acquisition. I attached the emails between me and Ms. Alastair. I highlighted my call logs, my research documents, my initial drafts of the proposal. I built an airtight case, not for a lawyer, but for myself. A portfolio of my own value. I had spent my entire career believing that good work was enough, that competence would be rewarded. I had been wrong. Good work wasn't enough. You had to be willing to fight for it. Ms. Alastair had just handed me a sword. And for the first time in my life, I felt ready to use it. The fallout at the office was swift and chaotic. David, my boss, was in full-blown panic mode. The Sterling Finch account represented nearly 15% of our division's projected annual revenue. Losing it would be catastrophic, not just for the company, but for his own career. Suddenly, I was the most popular person on the floor. David called me into his office for a chat. The next morning, the door was closed. His demeanor, which had always been one of paternalistic authority, was now a strange mix of forced friendliness and raw desperation. "Amy," he began, gesturing for me to sit. "What a day yesterday, huh? Real curveball." "It was interesting," I said, my voice neutral. "Look," he said, leaning forward, his hands clasped on his desk. "We obviously have a situation here. A personality conflict that has gotten out of hand. Ms. Alastair is particular. She's formed a bond with you, which is great. Fantastic work on that front. But Ben is a director now. We can't just sideline him. It would be a bad look for the company. It would undermine the chain of command. The chain of command was undermined when my work was presented by someone else," I stated calmly. He winced. Okay, fair point. Maybe we could have handled that better. But we can't change the past. We need to find a solution. A way forward. I was thinking, you and Ben could co-lead the account. A true partnership. You handle the strategy. He handles the client-facing relationship stuff. It's the perfect blend of your talents. It was a laughable suggestion. He still didn't get it. Miss Alastair hadn't objected to Ben's personality. She had objected to his presence. She wanted me. Period. But David wasn't trying to solve the client's problem. He was trying to solve his problem. He was trying to avoid a politically messy situation. "I don't think that's going to work, David," I said. Miss Alastair was very clear. "Clients say things in the heat of the moment," he said dismissively. "She can be managed. If you present it to her as a united front, she'll come around. You just need to get Ben back in her good graces. So your solution is for me to use the trust I built with the client to repair the damage caused by a man who stole credit for my work?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "You want me to vouch for him?" "I want you to be a team player, Amy," he said, his frustration boiling over. I want you to think about the good of the company, not just your own ego. My ego. That's what he thought this was about. Not about professional integrity or respect or getting what I had earned. It was just my petty feelings. In that moment, any lingering loyalty I had for him evaporated. I'll think about it, I said, standing up. It was a lie. I had already made my decision. Later that day, Ben cornered me by the elevator's ... The smug confidence was gone, replaced by a desperate, almost menacing energy. "We need to talk," he said, blocking my path. "I have nothing to say to you, Ben." "Oh, I think you do," he sneered. "You think you're pretty smart, don't you? Getting your new best friend to throw a tantrum for you. You're trying to torpedo my career." "Your career is your own business," I said, trying to step around him. He moved to block me again. "You know what's going to happen if you push this. David is going to have to choose, and he's not going to choose the quiet little worker bee who causes problems. He's going to choose the director he just promoted. They'll find a way to manage Alistair. And you'll be pushed out. They'll make your life so miserable you'll have to quit. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to go to David. You're going to tell him you're on board with the co-lead plan. And we are going to run this account together. And maybe, if you're a very good team player, I'll even remember to give you credit once in a while." It was a threat. Plain and simple. A desperate, ugly threat from a man who knew he was losing. I looked him dead in the eye. The fear I might have once felt was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. "No," I said. "I'm not going to do that. I think you're the one who needs to be worried about their career, Ben. Now get out of my way." I pushed past him and walked away, not looking back. The battle lines were drawn. And they had all made the fatal mistake of underestimating me. One last time. The summons came via a sterile calendar invitation. Meeting to discuss Sterling Finch account strategy. The attendees were me, David, and Carolyn Vance, the division vice president. This was it, the final showdown. I spent the 48 hours before the meeting preparing. I polished the portfolio I had built, turning it into a concise, powerful presentation. It was a timeline of the deal, showcasing my sole involvement at every critical juncture. It was undeniable. I also had a second document prepared, my letter of resignation. I had come to a simple, liberating conclusion. I was willing to lose my job to win this fight. Because it wasn't about the job anymore. It was about the principle. If they wouldn't respect my work, if they wouldn't acknowledge my value, then I didn't want to work for them. The fear of being fired, which had held me captive for so long, was gone, and its absence was exhilarating. I also did something I had never done before. I reached out to Eleanor Alistair directly. I sent her a brief, professional email. "Ms. Alistair, thank you again for your vote of confidence. I have a critical meeting with my company's leadership on Thursday to determine the path forward for your account. I intend to honor your request. Regards, Amelia Hayes." Her reply came within the hour. "Amelia, my request is not a suggestion. It is a condition of our business relationship. I have faith you will handle it. Sterling Finch's loyalty is to people, not to companies. Keep that in mind. EA loyalty is to people, not to companies." It was a lifeline and a promise. It was the final piece of armor I needed. I walked into the VP's office feeling strangely calm. Carolyn Vance was a sharp, intimidating woman in her 50s, known for her focus on the bottom line. David was already there, looking nervous. "Amelia," Thank you for coming, Carolyn began, getting straight to the point. David has brought me up to speed on the delicate situation with the Sterling Finch account. We find ourselves in a difficult position. It's only difficult if you make it difficult, I said politely. The client has made her wishes perfectly clear. The client is not always right, Carolyn countered, her eyes like chips of ice. And it is not feasible for us to sideline a director based on a client's whim. It sets a terrible precedent. We need a solution that works for us. David has proposed a co-leadership structure. He tells me you are resistant. I am, I confirmed. Because it's not a solution. It's a stopgap measure that ignores the client's explicit directive. It's a solution that prioritizes internal politics over client satisfaction. And on an account this large, that seems like a fatal miscalculation. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Caroline's expression didn't change. And what do you propose, Amelia? This was my moment. I took a breath. I'm not proposing anything. I'm stating a fact. I am the one who built this account from the ground up. For 6 months, I was the sole architect of this deal. I have the documentation to prove it. I slid a copy of my portfolio across the table to her. Ben Carter's involvement was limited to the final signing meeting, where he misrepresented my work as his own. A misrepresentation that David allowed. David went pale. Now, that's not fair. I'm not finished, I said, my voice cutting him off. Carolyn held up a hand to silence him, her eyes scanning my document. The client has made it clear that her trust is in me. The deal is contingent on my leadership. Therefore, there are only 2 possible outcomes. Outcome 1. You honor the client's wishes. You give me sole leadership of the Sterling Finch account. You give me the director title that Ben received using my work, and you reassign him to a different division where he will have no contact with this account or with me. We move forward. We keep the client, and we make a lot of money. Carolyn looked up from the portfolio, one eyebrow raised. And outcome 2? Outcome 2, I said, is you continue to prioritize Ben's career over this account. You try to force me into a partnership I won't accept, and the client will reject. The deal falls apart. Sterling Finch walks, and so do I. I slid my letter of resignation across the table. Because as Ms. Alistair so wisely pointed out to me, loyalty is to people, not to companies. And my loyalty is to the client who saw my value when my own leadership did not. So, the betrayal. Choice is yours. Do you want to keep the director who lost the deal, or the one who can save it? The silence in the room was absolute. David looked like he was going to be sick. Carolyn Vance stared at me, a long, unblinking, analytical gaze. She was recalculating. She was assessing risk. She was looking at the bottom line. And for the first time I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I was it. The decision came down the next day. It wasn't delivered with any fanfare or apology. It was a cold corporate maneuver, executed with ruthless efficiency. Carolyn Vance called me to her office. David was not present. Amelia, she said, her tone crisp. After reviewing the situation and the materials you provided, we have decided to move forward with your proposed solution. She said the word proposed as if it left a bad taste in her mouth. Effective immediately, you are promoted to Director of Strategic Accounts. You will have sole leadership of the Sterling Finch portfolio. Mr. Carter is being transferred to the Midwest Division to handle regional accounts, effective Monday. Is that satisfactory? Yes, I said, my voice betraying none of the triumphant, dizzying relief I felt. It is. Good, she said. already turning her attention to her computer screen. Don't make me regret this. Your first performance review will be in 6 months. The meeting was over. I was dismissed. Walking back to my desk felt like floating. The whispers that followed me were different now. They were no longer whispers of gossip, but of awe and a little bit of fear. I had taken on the system. And Ben was clearing out his desk when I walked past. He didn't look at me .. He just shoved papers into a cardboard box with a kind of violent, jerky anger. Our eyes met for a brief second. His were full of a raw, impotent hatred. I felt nothing, no pity, no triumph. Just a kind of vast, weary emptiness. He was a problem that had been solved. My relationship with David was irrevocably broken. He avoided me for days. When he finally did speak to me, it was with a forced, awkward formality. The easy mentorship, the paternalistic guidance, it was all gone. In its place was a grudging, resentful respect. I was no longer his subordinate. I was a power he had to reckon with. 2 weeks later, I flew out to meet with Eleanor Alistair at the Sterling Finch headquarters. I walked into her stunning corner office, with its panoramic views of the city. This time I walked in alone. "Amelia," she said, rising from her desk with a genuine smile. "I knew you could handle it." "I had a good mentor," I replied. She laughed, a warm, rich sound. "I don't mentor, Amelia. I invested in your competence, and I'm pleased to see it paid off. Now," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite her desk, "let's get to work. We have a partnership to build." As I sat down and opened my new, pristine laptop, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. I had learned the hardest lesson of my career. That competence, while essential, is silent. It doesn't announce itself. You have to be its advocate. You have to be willing to fight for it. You have to be willing to give it a voice. I had found my voice in the quiet fury of betrayal, and it had led me here, to this office, to this partnership, to this new beginning, and I knew I would never let anyone silence it again.